Hello, welcome to the January session of History Kids Club. My name is Linnea Kuglich. I am the Historical Programming Coordinator here at the Historic Village at Allaire. Allaire Village was an interesting place in the 19th century. Like the way we live today, the people living at Allaire would have had a wide variety of domestic and wild animals living around them. The villagers, for example, would have kept goats and sheep and chickens. James P. Allaire, the man who established the village in 1822, kept a prize-winning herd of steer. His wife, Kalisha, kept a flock of chickens in a hutch that she personally selected the location for. It wasn't only domestic animals, though, that lived around the village. The 19th century was a popular time to conduct birding, which basically meant watching for and feeding wild birds. Today, we're going to be working together to make a suet feeder, which is basically a combination of seeds and berries in a hardened mixture of rendered animal fat, which we nowadays call lard. If you have a History Kids Club kit for the month of January, you already have all of the supplies you'll need to make your bird feeder on hand. Your History Kids Club kit, which can be purchased via the Allaire Village website and picked up from our village, will contain all of the supplies you need. You should have 3 on bird seed. The other will have unsalted raw sunflower seeds, and the third will have dried cranberries. In addition, you'll have a small package of lard. We're using about 2 ounces today. That will actually provide enough for you to make a second suet bird feeder if you would like. If you are making this without the History Kids Club kits, you're going to have to secure these materials on your own, and I can't tell you exactly how much lard you'll need because you'll also need a mold. This can be done with a bundt pan or any other kind of donut-shaped mold. We have a silicone donut club kit mold, so it'll be nice and easy to get your bird feeder out again. You're also going to need to provide some supplies from home. For a start, you're going to need 1 large stovetop pan. This is going to be an important part of making what we call a double boiler, which is a mechanism that lets heat be transferred evenly into a smaller pan. You're going to need a smaller container to put inside of that larger stovetop pan. This can be glass or metal. A measuring cup will work well if you watch it carefully. In addition, you're going to need to provide an oven mitt because you're going to be handling some hot materials. On that note, you should probably make sure you have an adult who's willing to help you make your suet feeder on hand. Finally, you're going to need some water to help make your double boiler.
The first step in this process is going to be mixing your seeds. So you can see I've got 3 teacups here holding a mixed bird seed, as well as some sunflower seeds, unsalted, and some dried cranberries. You might note that I've got these in teacups, which is interesting because in the 19th century, people often used teacups in their cooking activities as well as to drink tea from. They were a very utilitarian vessel. So I'm going to start out by pouring my bird seed into this little cup here. You don't need to use all of your bird seed. Again, we're filling a small mold that's maybe 4 ounces maximum. So I've made sure that in the kits we've sent out, you all have plenty of bits and pieces of each of these substances. But you might not need to use all of them. So just look for a sort of healthy amount of each ingredient. And then when you're ready, you can either use a spoon or you can get creative like me and you can mix them up. I'm just kind of shaking these out here. And when I pull my hand away, we have a nice mixture of the 3. After you've mixed all of these, you're going to take your seeds and berries and pour them to fill up the little mold that you have. You might need more of all of these materials if you're using your own container to mold your container, which is provided in the History Kids Club package, is about 4 ounces. So you can see I have a lot of odds and ends left over. Make sure it's nice and full, so you want it to be about even with the top of your mold. I think that's about right there. The second thing you'll need to do is prepare a double boiler for melting the suet in your kits. That will mean you'll need to find a medium to large stovetop pan, and then you're going to be filling that with water. You don't want too much water to be in that pan. What you want to do is have enough water so that it will convey heat from the stove to a smaller metal container, which you're going to put in the interior of that pot. What you're going to do is put water into the pot, place it on the stove, and turn the heat up to medium-high. Over the next 5 minutes or so, it should start to boil, at which point you're going to want to reduce the heat to a simmer. To make your double boiler, you're going to take your smaller metal container and put it in the center of your stovetop pot. This is going to allow the heat from the stove to be transferred to the smaller vessel evenly, so it will melt whatever you put inside of it evenly. Once that's in place, you're going to take the lard and you're going to pop it into that smaller vessel. Make sure you get as much of the lard as possible. For those of you who've received a History Kids Club kit, the lard is going to be slightly more than you need. You can actually use the excess materials that you've been provided to make a second feeder, or you can take the seeds and bits of fruit and you can scatter them outside for wild animals and birds. It's interesting once you have your first feeder made to compare the sorts of animals and the types of birds that each different feeding It'll take about 5 minutes for your lard to melt from a solid into a liquid. You should end up with a relatively clear, kind of buttery looking liquid. Turn the heat off on your stovetop. When your pot ceases to produce bubbles, when your water stops boiling, take out the second container and make sure you grab a hot pad for this and have an adult present. Take your melted lard and pour it slowly into the birdseed mold. You don't want it to overflow, but you want enough lard to be in the mold that you cover most of the seeds. So try and move in a small kind of circular motion. All right, that looks about good for me. After that, you are going to leave your mold to cool at room temperature, or if you haven't filled your mold all the way to the top and have an adult present, you can try putting it in the refrigerator to cool down faster. This is the bird feeder after it's been left alone for about 30 minutes. Again, if you want to hasten the cooling process, you can pop this into the refrigerator or maybe even into the freezer. Now that this is solidified all the way through, our next step is to delicately take it out of the silicone mold, which, for those of you who did not purchase a kit, this may be a bit more challenging. The silicone that we've included in our Allaire History Kids kit is especially useful because it can be gently pulled off. If you're using, say, a bundt pan or a metal donut mold, it's going to be a much harder removal process. So I'm just delicately peeling the silicone away, and in a second I've loosened it here. Now I can pop it right out, and it's retaining its shape, which is excellent, and you can see how pretty it is on the front. This is kind of beautiful. Now our next step is going to be preparing this to hang. So all of our History Kids kits will include a length of yarn or twine. What you're going to do is make a kind of sliding knot here. So if you take your piece of string and fold it in half, so you have two ends on one side and a loop on the other, you're going to take that loop or the ends of the string, whichever you prefer, and sneak it through the hole in the center of your suet feeder. So you see that I have the loop through the center and the ends of the string at one side. Your next step is going to be taking those two ends and passing them over the top of the suet feeder and through the loop on the string that you've passed through there. So you end up with this excellent little hitch knot. Now keep in mind that you don't want to be doing this in direct sunlight because the suet, it's a suet feeder now, but the lard, when it's solidified, is sensitive to sunlight and to heat. So You don't want to be doing this next to a hot stove or next to a space heater, or you're going to have some very melty lard on your hands. Now, in order to make the part that you actually hang it with, what I'd recommend is making 2 very basic knots on the very end of your string here. So I've just done a double knot, and lo and behold, I can now hang this on a tree for wildlife to enjoy. Once you've completed this activity, hang it somewhere that you can see from maybe your home windows. And if you have purchased our History Kids booklet for January of 2022, you'll have some awesome activities that you can follow this craft up with.